He threw the ring across the room. Not gently, not accidentally. He picked it up off the nightstand, the diamond ring he had placed on her finger 4 years ago in front of 200 witnesses, and he threw it against the wall like it was trash. "You're suffocating me," Dominic said. "You always have been." Elena stood in the doorway of their bedroom, one hand pressed flat against her stomach. She hadn't told him yet. She had been trying to tell him for 3 weeks. Tonight was supposed to be the night. She looked at the ring on the floor. Then she looked at him. Then she looked at the woman sitting on the edge of their bed, still adjusting her dress. Elena didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just turned around and walked out. And Dominic Voss, the most feared man in Boston, let her go. That was his first mistake. And it would cost him everything. If this story moved you, stay with us. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. And drop a comment below telling us the city or country where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit like if you believe some mistakes can never be undone, and some love, once broken, refuses to die quietly. The night Elena Ashford Voss stopped being a wife, she was wearing a navy blue dress that Dominic had never seen before. She had bought it 3 weeks earlier, the same afternoon she left the doctor's office with a small paper printout tucked inside her purse. She had stood in the boutique dressing room for 20 minutes, turning sideways in the mirror, pressing her palm against her stomach, and trying to understand that what she was feeling, that fragile, terrifying bloom of joy, was real. She bought the dress because she wanted to look beautiful when she told him. She had learned, over 4 years of marriage to Dominic Voss, that beauty was a kind of armor, that if she came to him looking composed and lovely, he was less likely to glance at his phone while she was talking. She had planned it carefully. The Whitmore Gala was their event, the annual charity fundraiser where Dominic played philanthropist for 3 hours before going back to being whatever he actually was the rest of the year. They always arrived together. They always left together. And in between, in the quiet 20 minutes before the event began, when Dominic would go up to the reserved suite to change his cufflinks or take a call, Elena would follow him up. That was their ritual. It was one of the few private moments they still shared. She had imagined it a dozen different ways on the drive over, the look on his face. Whether he would pull her close or go very still the way he did when something genuinely moved him. She had even imagined, briefly, and with a kind of desperate hopefulness she was ashamed of, that this might be the thing that finally cracked him open. That a baby, their baby, might reach the part of him that she had stopped being able to reach. She found the suite on the 14th floor. The door was slightly open. She pushed it the rest of the way. Dominic was sitting on the edge of the bed. His jacket was off. His shirt was untucked. And Kara Weston, his assistant of 2 years, the woman Elena had never quite been able to bring herself to distrust despite every quiet instinct telling her otherwise, was standing with her back to the door, one hand resting on Dominic's shoulder, her blouse half open. Neither of them heard Elena come in. She stood there for 4 full seconds. She counted them later, lying on the floor of a gas station bathroom 40 miles outside the city, because she needed to account for every moment of that night in order to believe it had actually happened. 4 seconds. Then Dominic looked up. He didn't flinch. That was the thing that undid her most completely, later. He didn't flinch or pale or stumble over his words the way a man caught doing something terrible is supposed to do. He just looked at her with something close to exhaustion, like she was an inconvenience he had been expecting. Elena. That was all he said, just her name, like a period at the end of a sentence. Kara turned around slowly. She had the grace to look uncomfortable, at least. She reached for the buttons of her blouse, and Elena watched her hands move and felt the entire architecture of her marriage collapse in real time, quietly and completely. The way a building sometimes comes down in controlled demolition, every floor folding into the one below it until there is nothing left but dust and a changed skyline. "Get out," Dominic said, and for one wild, fractured second, Elena thought he was saying it to Kara. He wasn't. He was looking directly at Elena when he said it. She felt the word land in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, every ring spreading outward and outward until there was nowhere left for the ripple to go. "Dominic," she started. "Not tonight." He stood up. His voice had that quality it got sometimes, flat and controlled, the voice he used in meetings she wasn't supposed to know about. "I don't have the capacity for this tonight. We'll talk tomorrow." "I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. She hated that. She pressed her hand against her stomach again, the gesture she'd been making for 3 weeks without quite realizing it, the reflex of a woman who had already started protecting something. Dominic misread it. Or maybe he didn't read it at all. He crossed the room toward her, and for a second her heart lurched. Hope, stupid, stubborn hope. But he reached past her to pick up the ring from the nightstand, the ring she had set down earlier when she was fixing her earrings, and he held it out to her. "Put this on," he said. "We have a gala to get through." She stared at the ring in his palm. 3 weeks ago, she had cried in a pharmacy parking lot because she was so happy she didn't know what else to do with the feeling. She had sat in her car with a positive pregnancy test in her hand and thought, this is it. This is the thing that makes everything make sense. The fertility treatments, the failed attempts, the 2 years of hoping and waiting and pretending she was fine when her period came and she wasn't fine at all of it had been leading here. She had believed that. Standing in that hotel suite with Kara Weston buttoning her blouse in the background and Dominic holding out her ring with the same energy he might use to hand someone a parking ticket, Elena felt the last of that belief dissolve. She didn't put the ring on. She picked it up off his palm, held it for a moment, and then set it back down on the nightstand. "Elena." A warning in his voice now, low and sharp. "I'm tired," she said. "We have a commitment. I'm tired, Dominic." He looked at her then, really looked, for maybe the first time all evening. And something shifted behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly, but the recognition that something was different, that she was using a different voice, a finished voice. "Go to the gala," she told him. "I'll tell the car service I need to go home." "You're being dramatic." "I'm really not." "Elena?" "Good night, Dominic." She walked out of the suite. She walked down the hall, into the elevator, through the lobby, past the clusters of well-dressed people who didn't know that the Mafia King's wife had just watched her marriage end on the 14th floor of the Whitmore Hotel. She walked out the front door into the October night air, and she kept walking until she found a bench 2 blocks away, and she sat down on it and she put her face in her hands. She didn't cry. Not yet. The shock was still doing its job. She sat there for a long time, the city moving around her, and she thought about the ring she'd left on the nightstand and the ultrasound photo in her purse, and the dress she'd bought 3 weeks ago, because she wanted to look beautiful when she told him. Then she pulled out her phone, called a car service that wasn't the one Dominic used, and went home. The house they lived in was a federal-style townhouse on Beacon Hill that Dominic had purchased before they were married, and in 4 years, Elena had never quite been able to make it feel like hers. It was beautiful the way a museum is beautiful, impressive and cold and full of things you aren't supposed to touch. She moved through it in the dark that night, not bothering with the lights. She knew every inch of it by now. The third stair that creaked, the way the kitchen faucet needed to be turned at a slight angle or it dripped, the specific quality of silence in the master bedroom that had been telling her for over a year that something was wrong, that they were two people who had stopped finding their way back to each other. She went to the closet and she pulled out a bag. Not her large luggage, that would take too long. Just the overnight bag she kept packed for hospital visits, because her cardiologist had told her 18 months ago that with her condition, it was smart to be ready. She had never thought she'd use it for this. She took the bag and she added things to it, practical things. Her important documents, already filed in a small accordion folder she kept in the back of the closet because she had been organized her entire life and old habits persisted even through disaster. Her laptop. 2 changes of clothes. Her medications, the cardiac medications she took every morning, and now the prenatal vitamins the OB had prescribed, and the blood pressure pills she wasn't supposed to need for another 20 years but had needed since she was 31. She paused in the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Navy dress. Careful makeup. Hair she had spent 40 minutes on because she wanted to look beautiful when she told him. She looked absolutely fine. That was the grotesque thing about heartbreak. It didn't show up in your face the way it felt in your chest. She changed her clothes. She washed her face. She packed the prenatal vitamins. Then she went to the nightstand on her side of the bed, and she picked up the small ultrasound photo the technician had printed for her, the one she'd been carrying for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment. And she put it in the pocket of her jacket, close to her body, and she walked out of the house. She didn't leave a note. She didn't know what she would have written. "I came to tell you we were having a baby, and you told me to get out. I watched you look at me with nothing in your eyes, and I understood that I had been alone in this marriage for a long time. I can't raise a child in a house where love is a transaction, and I'm always the one paying." She could have written any of those things. She wrote none of them. She just left. The drive out of Boston took 2 hours at night with light traffic. Elena didn't plan a destination. She drove south along the coast because the coast had always made her feel like things were survivable, the way the ocean insists on continuing regardless of what happens on the shore. She stopped twice. Once for gas. Once because her hands were shaking badly enough that she didn't trust herself on the highway. She sat in a rest stop parking lot for 22 minutes and breathed carefully the way her cardiologist had taught her. The slow counted breathing that kept her heart from doing the thing it sometimes did. The stuttering, irregular thing that landed her in the hospital twice before they found the right medication combination. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. "I'm sorry," she said to the dark. To no one. To the small life she was carrying that couldn't hear her yet and wouldn't understand her if it could. "I'm sorry you're starting out like this." She didn't know if she was apologizing for leaving or for staying as long as she had. She started the car again and kept driving. She found Hartley Cove by accident, or the way people find things they were looking for without knowing they were looking. A coastal town 3 hours south of Boston, with a harbor and a main street and a motel called the Sea Anchor that had vacancy and charged by the week and didn't ask many questions. The woman at the front desk was in her 60s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a paperback novel face down on the counter. And when Elena walked in at 2 in the morning with one bag and shadows under her eyes, she just said, "How long are you thinking?" And when Elena said she wasn't sure, she nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable answer. "Week at a time, then," the woman said. "I'm Della. Breakfast is at 8. Coffee's free. There's a clinic 2 streets over if you need anything." Elena paid cash. She had been making small cash withdrawals from her personal account for months. Not because she had planned to leave, but because Dominic monitored their joint account, and she had learned, gradually and without fully acknowledging what she was learning, that having money he couldn't see gave her the ability to breathe. She carried her bag up to the second-floor room. She set it on the chair. She sat on the edge of the bed and she finally let herself cry. Not the performative tears of someone who wants to be seen crying, but the ugly, gut-wrenching kind that you try to swallow down and can't. She cried until she was exhausted, and then she lay back on the bed in her clothes, and she put her hand on her stomach, and she made herself one promise. Whatever happened next, she was going to do this right. She was going to take her medications and eat her meals and find a doctor and do everything the way it needed to be done, because the thing she was carrying wasn't just hers anymore. That was the first night of Elena Ashford's new life. She didn't know yet how much it was going to cost her. 3 weeks later, Dominic Voss sat in his study at midnight with a glass of scotch that had gone warm and untouched in his hand, and he thought about the fact that his wife had not called him. He had expected her to call. That was the thing he kept coming back to, the grain of sand he couldn't stop working at. He had genuinely expected her to call. In 4 years of marriage, Elena had never stayed angry longer than 48 hours. She was constitutionally unable to let conflict sit unaddressed. She would go quiet, yes, and cold, yes, but she always came back around. She always found her way back to civility, if not warmth. 3 weeks of silence was not Elena. He had told himself in the first week that she was making a point, that she had found out about Kara, and he felt something when he thought this, something he preferred not to examine closely. And she was punishing him with her absence the way women in her position sometimes did. He had told himself this and almost believed it. By the second week, he had told himself she was staying with her friend Margot in Cambridge and would surface when she was ready. He had not called Margot to confirm this because he preferred the version where it was true. By the third week, he had stopped telling himself things and had started sitting in his study at midnight with warm scotch and a specific kind of quiet in his chest that he didn't have a name for. His phone lit up on the desk. His mother. He let it ring. Catherine Voss had never liked Elena, had never made any secret of it, had called her soft and sheltered and not built for this family in tones that suggested these were polite substitutes for worse words. When Elena disappeared, Catherine had reacted with something uncomfortably close to satisfaction. "I told you," she had said. She was always going to fold. Dominic had not corrected her. He had just nodded and let her talk and thought about the look on Elena's face in that hotel suite, a look he had been trying not to think about because when he did think about it, something in him went sideways. She had been trying to say something. He remembered that now, in the midnight quiet. She had said, "I need to tell you something." She had pressed her hand against her stomach in that way she'd been doing lately, a gesture he had noticed and not examined because examining things required a kind of attention he had been withholding from his marriage for reasons he understood perfectly well and preferred not to think about. "I need to tell you something." He picked up his phone. He scrolled to her contact. Elena, just her name, no emoji or nickname the way some men had for their wives, because Dominic Voss was not the emoji type, and he looked at it for a long time. Then he put the phone back down without calling. He told himself she would call when she was ready. He told himself that. He almost made it to sleep. In Hartley Cove, Elena was lying in the dark of her motel room, 37 days into her new life, listening to her own heartbeat, the way she always did when she couldn't sleep, counting the beats, checking for the irregularity, the small skipped percussion that told her she needed to slow down and breathe. Her heart was behaving tonight, mostly. The OB she'd found in town, a brisk, practical woman named Dr. Finch, who had taken one look at Elena's medical history and then scheduled 4 follow-up appointments instead of 2, had told her that the pregnancy was progressing normally for someone in her situation. For someone in your situation was the careful phrase they kept using, the phrase that meant you have a structural issue with your heart and carrying a baby to term is going to require precision management and a significant amount of luck. Elena had not told anyone she was the wife of Dominic Voss. She had given her name as Elena Ashford. She paid cash when she could. She used her personal cell, the one she'd had since before the marriage, the one she'd kept because old numbers felt like lifelines. Della, the motel owner, had started leaving things outside her door. A container of soup, a paperback novel. Once, inexplicably, a small potted succulent with a post-it that said, "These survive anything." Elena had put the plant on the windowsill and looked at it every morning. She was surviving. It didn't feel like surviving. It felt like barely keeping her head above water while also trying not to drown the small person she was keeping alive inside her. But her doctor had told her the baby was healthy, had told her it was a girl. A girl. Elena had sat with that information for 3 days before she could say it out loud to herself. "I'm having a daughter." She pressed her hand to her stomach in the dark. She thought, not for the first time, about the life her daughter would have if she went back. The townhouse on Beacon Hill that felt like a museum. The controlled, transactional world where love was something you earned by not asking for too much. The way Dominic looked at her sometimes, not unkindly, just absent, the look of a man who had stopped seeing her. She thought about the ring she'd left on the nightstand. She thought about get out. She had been trying to tell him for 3 weeks before that night. 3 weeks of choosing moments that were never quite right, of starting sentences that got interrupted, of swallowing the news back down because he was on a call or leaving for a meeting, or his mother was there, or Kara was there with her tablet and her careful efficiency and her hand that always seemed to be resting on something that belonged to Elena. She had tried to tell him, he had simply never listened. That was the thing she kept coming back to. Not the betrayal alone, as shattering as that was, but the pattern it exposed. The realization that she had been trying to reach him for years and he had been fundamentally unreachable, and she had kept trying anyway because that was the kind of woman she was, persistent and a little foolish about the things she loved. Her heartbeat stuttered, once. She counted, waited. It steadied. She closed her eyes. "We're gonna be okay," she said to the dark, and the silence, and the small girl who couldn't hear her yet. She said it like she believed it. She was working on making that true. The succulent on the windowsill had grown 3 new leaves. Elena noticed this on a Tuesday morning in her 8th week in Hartley Cove, standing in her motel room in socked feet with a mug of decaf pressed between both palms, watching the light come in off the water. She had started doing this, noticing small things. The way the fog burned off the harbor by 9. The particular creak of the 4th step on the motel staircase. The sound Della made when she was about to say something she'd been holding for a while. A small preparatory clearing of the throat. It was the kind of attention she had never had space for in Boston. There, her awareness had always been occupied by larger things. Dominic's mood, his schedule, the shifting social architecture of a life spent beside a man who inspired either loyalty or terror in everyone around him. Here, her attention had nowhere to go but inward and small, and she was discovering that small things had weight, that they accumulated. She was 14 weeks pregnant. Dr. Finch had told her the previous Thursday that everything looked stable, which in the specific language of Elena's medical situation meant not deteriorating, which was the best they could reasonably hope for at this stage. The baby was measuring correctly. The heartbeat was strong. Elena's own heart was behaving with what Dr. Finch called acceptable variability, which was doctor speak for, "We're watching it closely and we haven't panicked yet." Elena had driven home from that appointment and sat in the motel parking lot and cried for 10 minutes. Not from grief this time, but from the specific exhaustion of being someone for whom good news always arrived wrapped in qualifications. Her phone buzzed on the dresser. She looked at it. Unknown number with a Boston area code. She didn't answer. This had been happening more frequently in the last 2 weeks. Unknown numbers. Once, a number she recognized, Margot's landline, that she'd also let go to voicemail. She couldn't talk to Margot yet. Margot had a good heart and no ability to keep a secret when Dominic Voss looked her in the eye and asked a direct question, and Elena wasn't ready to be found. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She rinsed her mug in the bathroom sink and got ready for her shift. She had taken a job at a place called the Anchor Diner 3 weeks into her stay. Not because she needed the money, not immediately, but because the motel room had started closing in on her, and she needed structure the way some people needed medication. Della had mentioned it, actually. Her niece had quit to go back to school, and they were short a waitress. Elena had gone in the next morning and told the owner, a compact, weathered man named Pete, that she had no experience, but she was reliable and a fast learner. Pete had looked at her hands, soft, uncalloused, the hands of a woman who had never carried plates for a living, and then looked at her face. "You running from something?" he asked. Not unkindly. The way people in small coastal towns asked questions, direct because everyone eventually knew everyone's business anyway. "I'm running toward something," Elena said. "I'm just not sure what yet." Pete had hired her on the spot. She was a mediocre waitress, technically. She forgot table numbers and had to write everything down twice, and once dropped an entire tray of coffee mugs because she'd misjudged the edge of the counter. But she showed up exactly when she said she would. She was patient with difficult customers in the way that only people who had survived genuinely difficult people could manage, and she never complained. Pete had stopped looking at her with the sideways appraisal of a man who expected her to disappear and started looking at her like furniture. A compliment, in its way. She wrapped her apron strings twice around her middle and tied them in front, accommodating the small but increasingly undeniable curve that she had started thinking of, privately and with a tenderness that still surprised her, as her girl. In Boston, Dominic Voss had not slept properly in 6 weeks. This was not something he would have admitted to anyone, and in fact no one in his immediate orbit would have guessed it from looking at him, because Dominic had spent 20 years perfecting the appearance of a man who was never rattled. But the hours between 2 and 5 in the morning had become a specific kind of hell, a long stretch of dark in which his mind moved through the same territory over and over, circling something he hadn't yet brought himself to look at directly. He sat in the study at 2:30 on a Wednesday morning with his laptop open to Elena's name in a private investigator's report that he had commissioned and then immediately regretted commissioning and had been staring at for 40 minutes without reading. The PI's name was Galloway. He was discreet, expensive, and thorough, and he had found Elena's car registered to a motel parking lot in Hartley Cove within 10 days. He had reported her location, her employer, her daily routine, and the fact that she had been to a medical clinic 4 times in the past 6 weeks. Medical clinic. Dominic closed the laptop. He pressed his fingers against his eyes. He had not told Galloway to find out more. I wasn't sure why. He had the information he needed to go get her. That was what he'd been telling himself, that he was going to go get her, that this couldn't continue, that a wife didn't just disappear without consequences for either of them. And yet every morning he woke up and did not go to Hartley Cove and could not exactly explain why. The door to the study opened. No knock. He didn't look up. "You're still awake," said his mother. Catherine Voss moved through the house as though she owned it, which she did not, technically, but had behaved as though she did since Dominic's father died and left her with nothing but her son's empire to inhabit. She was 63, impeccably dressed at all hours, and possessed of the specific coldness that Dominic had spent most of his life mistaking for strength. "I'm working," he said, "at 2 in the morning. She moved to the chair across from him and sat without being invited. "You're brooding. There's a difference." "What do you want, Mother?" "I want you to stop this." She crossed her legs. Her tone was calibrated, not unkind enough to provoke him, not gentle enough to suggest she actually cared. She had always operated in that precise middle distance. "She left, Dominic. People who leave don't come back. And even if she did, what exactly do you think would be different?" He looked at her. "I didn't ask for your assessment." "No, but you've been living in this house like a man waiting for a phone that isn't going to ring, and at some point someone has to say the obvious." She uncrossed her legs and leaned forward, just slightly. "Elena was never suited for this life. You knew that when you married her. You made a decision based on," a pause, delicate and devastating, "sentiment. Now she's made a decision based on the same. Let her go." "Go to bed, Mother." "Kara is patient," Catherine said, as though he hadn't spoken. "Kara understands what you need. She's not asking you to be someone you aren't." Something moved behind Dominic's eyes. Catherine saw it and did not flinch. She had never flinched from her son, which was either a testament to her nerve or a failure of her perception. I said go to bed. The words came out flat and final, the voice underneath his voice, and Catherine heard it because she had been hearing it her whole life. She stood. She adjusted the cuff of her robe. She walked to the door, and at the threshold she paused in the way she always paused at thresholds. For effect. For the last word. She took the things she needed, Catherine said without turning. She didn't take you. That should tell you something. She left. Dominic sat alone in the silence she left behind. He opened the laptop. He read Galloway's report from the beginning. Medical clinic. 4 visits in 6 weeks. He read those words 3 times. Then he picked up the phone and called Galloway. I need more, he said when the man answered. The clinic. Why is she going? That's going to require... I don't care what it requires. Find out. Kara Weston arrived at the Voss offices on Berkeley Street at 7:53 every morning, which was 7 minutes before Dominic, which was intentional. She had learned in 2 years of working for him that Dominic Voss did not like to arrive and find things incomplete. He liked to arrive and find things already in motion, already organized to his specifications, the machinery already running. It was part of the reason she had been so effective in this job. She anticipated the shape of his needs before he articulated them. She was good at that. Anticipating. She was at her desk now, the morning light across the papers she was sorting, when Marco, Dominic's head of security, a man she had never trusted and never let see that she didn't trust him, appeared in the doorway. He wants the Hargrove files, Marco said. He leaned against the frame with the specific ease of a man who used his body as a conversational tool. I'll pull them. She didn't look up. He also wants to know if you've heard from Elena. Now she looked up. Why would I have heard from Elena? Marco shrugged. The shrug was performing casualness. She and I went to the same gym back when she came into the office. Thought maybe she'd reached out. Kara looked at him for a long, even moment. I haven't heard from Elena, she said. I'll have the files to him in 20 minutes. Marco pushed off the doorframe. He was almost gone when he said over his shoulder, You know he's had someone looking for her. She kept her expression still. That's his business. Just thought you'd want to know. He disappeared down the corridor. Kara sat with her hands flat on her desk for 5 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and composed a text. Short, clean, the kind of message that looked casual to anyone who wasn't looking for the signal underneath it. He's moving. Need to know what you know before he does. She sent it and went back to the Hargrove files. Dr. Finch had a way of delivering difficult information that Elena had come to appreciate. No preamble, no warming up, just the fact, and then everything else. It was efficient in a way that felt respectful. Your blood pressure is elevated, she said, at Elena's 16-week appointment. She was reviewing the chart, her pen tapping twice against the clipboard. Not crisis level, but more than I want to see at this stage. I know, Elena said. You need to reduce stress. I know that too. Dr. Finch looked up. She had intelligent, unglamorous eyes and the manner of a woman who had stopped having time for softness somewhere around her 3rd year of residency. Elena, is there someone who should know about your condition? Family, the father. Elena looked at the ultrasound image still on the screen. The curve of a profile. A hand, tiny and distinct, against the dark. It's complicated, she said. Most things are. I'm asking from a medical standpoint. Depending on how this progresses, you may need support that goes beyond what I can provide here. You may need to make decisions quickly. I understand. I'm not sure you do. Dr. Finch set down the clipboard and looked at her straight. Your heart condition puts you in a category where we watch for early labor. We watch for cardiac events triggered by physical stress. The further this pregnancy progresses, the more variables we're managing. I need to know that if something happens, there's someone I can call. Elena thought about who that person would be. Her parents were gone. Her sister lived in Vancouver and barely remembered Elena's birthday. Margot was a liability. And Dominic? There's a woman downstairs, Elena said finally. Della, she runs the motel. I'll give you her number. Doctor. Finch looked at her for a moment. Not unkindly. Not with pity, exactly. More with the tired recognition of a woman who had seen this particular kind of alone many times before. All right, she said, and I'm going to start you on an additional medication. It'll help with the pressure. Don't skip doses. I never skip doses. Good. I mean it about the stress, Elena. Elena folded her hands in her lap. So do I. Galloway called back 4 days later. Dominic was in the middle of a meeting with the Hargrove group. a property acquisition that was, on its surface, entirely legitimate, and underneath the surface, the kind of transaction that kept 3 different city officials from asking inconvenient questions, and he excused himself in a way that did not invite comment and took the call in the corridor. "She's pregnant," Galloway said. Dominic stood very still. The sound of the meeting continued behind the closed door. Someone laughed at something. A chair scraped. "How far?" he said. His voice came out level. He didn't know how. 4 months, approximately, maybe a little more. The clinic is a combined OB and cardiology practice. From what I was able to pull together, she's being managed by both departments. Cardiology. "She has a heart condition," Dominic said slowly. This was not new information. He had known about Elena's condition, had been told about it before they were married, had absorbed it the way he absorbed most things about her, present in his awareness, not fully weighted. "Yes. And according to don't," he stopped Galloway. "Don't tell me from a file. Don't read me her medical information from a document you weren't supposed to have access to." Silence on the line. "Send me whatever you have," Dominic said. "Then consider this engagement complete." He ended the call. He stood in the corridor for 3 full minutes. He was aware of his own breathing in a way he almost never was. Aware of his hands. They were pressed flat against the wall, both of them, like he needed something to push against. 4 months. She had been trying to tell him something. "I need to tell you something." The hand pressed against her stomach, the ring she'd left on the nightstand. Not in anger, not thrown, not left as a statement, just set down, gently, the way you set something down when your hands are finally too full to carry it. He pushed off the wall. He walked back to the meeting room. He opened the door and 4 men looked at him with the particular attention of people who tracked powerful men's faces for information. "Something's come up," Dominic said. "We'll reschedule." He didn't wait for responses. I was in his car by 4 o'clock. He told Marco he was going to look at a property and gave him an address that was not Hartley Cove. He drove for an hour south before he fully understood what he was doing, that he was going there, that he had no plan, that he had never been more unprepared for anything in his life. He pulled off at a rest stop and sat in the car with the engine running. He tried to think about what he would say to her. Every version started wrong. Every opening line he could construct sounded like either justification or demand, and he knew her well enough, or had once known her well enough, to understand that she would close before either of those things, like a door going shut. He thought about what she had looked like in that hotel suite. Not the way he'd been forcing himself to remember it, flattened and manageable, his wife being dramatic, his wife overreacting. The actual image. Her face in the moment she understood what she was seeing. The way she had gone utterly still before she moved. The way someone goes still, not from calm, but from something shattering too fast for the body to process. And then her voice. "I need to tell you something." And then his voice. "Not tonight." He put his face in his hands. He sat like that for a long time. The sun moved. Trucks rumbled through. A family came out of the rest stop with 3 kids and a dog and piled noisily into a minivan and drove away, and Dominic watched them go and felt something shift in his chest that had no name and no useful function. He started the car. He drove back to Boston. He arrived home to find Kara in his study. This was not unusual. She worked late, she had a key, she moved through his professional space as easily as his staff. What was unusual was the fact that she was at his desk. Not beside it, not in front of it, but in his chair, behind his desk, with the laptop open. She looked up when he walked in. She didn't look startled. She looked caught, which was different. "What are you doing?" he said. "I was checking the Hargrove correspondence from my personal laptop." The pause was 1 beat too long. "Your work laptop was downstairs." He walked to the desk. She stood, smoothly, unhurried, the way she did everything. He looked at the screen. The email client was open, but the inbox he was looking at was not work. It was the private account, the one he kept for correspondence he didn't put through company servers. The account where Galloway's report had been sent. He looked at her. "Kara." His voice had gone very quiet. "Dominic, have you been in this account before?" She was good. She was genuinely very good, and in another context, at another time, he would have admired it. Her expression moved through a precisely managed sequence. Slight confusion, then concern, then the beginning of an explanation that would have been plausible if he were a different kind of man. But Dominic Voss had built an empire on reading people. He had survived 20 years in a world that destroyed inattentive men. "Don't," he said. She stopped. "Tell me what you know," he said. Tell me what you've told my mother. Tell me everything, starting from the beginning, and understand that I will verify every word. Kara stood very still. Something moved behind her eyes. Calculation, he thought, not guilt. She was calculating what he already knew, what she could still conceal, what the cost of lying versus telling the truth would be. She was doing math, he watched her do it, and then slowly her expression changed. Not to contrition, to something flatter, colder, the face underneath the face he had been permitted to see. She called you, Kara said, from the gala, twice, earlier that week, and once from the doctor's office. He stopped breathing. You were in the Hargrove meeting the first time. The second time, your mother intercepted the call and told her you were unavailable. The third time, a pause, something almost like discomfort. I told her you were in a call and would return it. I didn't pass the message. The silence in the room became something with texture. You knew, Dominic said. Not specifically, not what she... Kara stopped, started again. Your mother suspected. She'd seen the vitamins in Elena's bag at the Whitmore, at a previous event. She thought Elena was planning to use it, the pregnancy, as leverage. Leverage, he repeated, to keep you. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Dominic did not move. He was very aware of not moving, of holding himself extremely still in the way that he sometimes did before something happened that couldn't be taken back. He had learned a long time ago that the men who survived were not necessarily the strongest. They were the ones who paused before they acted, who let the worst of the feeling pass through them before they responded. He was letting it pass through him now. It was taking a long time. Get out, he said finally. Dominic, get out of my house. Give my assistant your key before you leave. Don't contact me through any personal channel. If I have questions, I will ask them through legal representation. Her mouth opened. Now, Kara. She left. He stood behind his desk for a long time after she was gone. The laptop was still open, the screen casting pale light across the surface of the desk. His desk, the desk his father had left him, the desk where he had signed the papers that built this entire empire, one careful document at a time. He thought about Elena in a motel room 3 hours south of here, carrying his child, going to a cardiologist alone, paying for her room in cash so he couldn't find her. He thought about the phone calls she had made that never reached him. He thought about his mother's voice. She was never suited for this life. He thought about Elena's hand setting that ring down on the nightstand. Gently. Not a statement. Not rage. Just the gesture of a woman who had run out of room to carry something and had made a decision about what she was willing to put down. He picked up his phone. He called Marco. I need you to get me information on a property attorney in Hartley Cove, he said, and tell my mother I'd like to speak with her tonight. A pause. About what, boss? Dominic looked at the open laptop. The Galloway file still on the screen. A pregnant woman with a cardiac condition in a coastal town who had been calling and calling and calling, and no one had passed the message. About what she's been doing with my life, he said. He ended the call. He sat in the silence, and for the first time in 4 years, maybe longer, maybe since before the marriage, since before the empire, since before he had made himself into the kind of man who didn't notice things, Dominic Voss was genuinely afraid. Not of rival families, not of federal scrutiny, not of any of the specific dangers that had structured his entire adult life. He was afraid that he had been given something extraordinary and irreplaceable and had failed to notice it until it was already walking away from him down a hotel corridor in a navy blue dress, pressing her hand flat against a secret she had been trying to share. He was afraid it was already too late. Catherine Voss arrived at 9:45. Not because she had been summoned at 9:45. Dominic had called at 8 and said tonight without a time, but because she always arrived 15 minutes late to things she considered beneath her authority, including conversations with her own son. It was a small exercise of power, and she had been performing it so long it had become unconscious. Dominic was standing when she came in, not sitting behind the desk, not positioned in the chair by the window the way he usually was for serious conversations. Standing in the middle of the room, which was unusual enough that Catherine paused at the threshold and recalibrated. You called this meeting, she said. So sit down. You're making me nervous. I'm not interested in your comfort level tonight. She studied him. What's happened? I want you to tell me about Elena's phone calls. The pause was very small, a half second, the length of a breath, and Dominic caught it the way he caught everything, filed it, understood it. I don't know what you mean, Catherine said. That's the wrong answer. Dominic called me. His voice was still level. He was working to keep it that way because he knew from long experience that raised voices gave the other person something to react to, something to defend against, and he didn't want to give his mother that. He wanted her exposed, 3 times, across 2 weeks, before the gala. The first time I was in a meeting, that I'll accept. The second time you intercepted the call. Catherine moved to the chair by the window. She sat down with careful composure, crossing her ankles, and the composure itself was a tell. She was organizing herself for a performance. She was going to disrupt everything, Catherine said. You had the Hargrove deal in final stages. You had 3 ongoing negotiations. The timing of whatever she was about to drop on you. You don't know what she was going to tell me. I knew enough. Tell me what you knew. Another pause, longer this time. Catherine looked at her hands, then back at him, and Dominic saw something move through her face that he very rarely saw. Not guilt, his mother didn't do guilt, but something adjacent to it, the recognition that a calculation had been made and the math was now being audited. I saw her at the Whitmore 2 months before the gala, Catherine said, in the powder room. She'd left her bag on the counter, you know how careless she was, and when she reached past me to get it, the bag tipped and several things fell out, including a pharmacy receipt. A breath. Prenatal vitamins. The room was very quiet. I put it together, Catherine said, and I thought about what she would do with that, how she would use it. Dominic, you were at a critical point. She's my wife. Each word came out separately, with weight. She was carrying my child, and you decided to filter that information based on what was convenient for my schedule. I decided to protect you. From what? His voice finally moved, shifted upward, and he felt the control slip slightly, let it slip, because some moments required it. From knowing that my wife was pregnant? From knowing that she was calling me to tell me something I had a right to know? What were you protecting me from, Mother? The possibility that I might have actually shown up for her? Catherine's chin lifted. That was her tell when she was done defending and shifting to attack. Dominic knew it as well as he knew his own heartbeat. She was going to take you away from everything your father built, Catherine said. She would have softened you. She was already softening you. I watched it happen, the first 2 years of that marriage. You were distracted. You were making decisions based on sentiment. You were running my empire the way I chose to run it. Running it poorly. Her voice sharpened. Your father never would have. My father is dead. Flat. Final. And I didn't call you here to discuss his standards. I called you here to understand exactly what you did and why. Because tomorrow morning I'm sitting down with the attorneys and I need to know the full scope of what I'm dealing with. The word attorneys landed. Catherine heard it. You're not serious, she said. I'm removing you from the foundation board. Your access to the accounts ends tomorrow. The house in Newport, that's in your name, so that stays. But this house, this office, this family's business, you're done, Mother. You're done having influence over anything that belongs to me. She stared at him. In 40 years of managing powerful men, first her husband, then her son, Catherine Voss had never had one look at her quite the way Dominic was looking at her now. Not with anger, which she could handle. Not with disappointment, which she had survived before. He was looking at her like she was someone he had finished making decisions about. You're doing this for a woman who left you, Catherine said. Her voice had gone cold. Not the performed coldness she used as a weapon, but the real thing, the underneath temperature. I'm doing this because it's right, Dominic said. Go home. She stood. She moved to the door with the rigid precision of a woman holding herself together through sheer mechanical will. At the threshold, she always stopped at thresholds, she turned. She won't come back, Catherine said. You can dismantle everything I've done and she still won't come back to you. You know that. Dominic looked at her. Good night, Mother. He didn't sleep. By 3 a.m, he was at the kitchen table with Elena's medical file. The contents of Galloway's report, which he had transferred to paper because he found paper easier to think around than a screen, spread in front of him. He read every word. The cardiac condition was called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. He had known the name, had heard it before, but he had absorbed it the way healthy people absorb medical terminology about someone they love, distantly, as information that applied to her but not to them, a fact about their life together that lived in the background. He had not read the specifics. He had not understood that what it meant, in the context of a pregnancy, was that her heart had to work significantly harder than a healthy woman's heart to sustain both her own circulation and the baby's, and that the risk of cardiac events increased with physical stress, with emotional stress, with elevated blood pressure, and with the normal physiological demands of third trimester. He read the cardiologist's notes that Galloway had obtained, He would deal with how Galloway had obtained them later, when he had space for that particular moral inventory, and a sentence near the bottom of the most recent visit summary stopped him cold. Patient presents with elevated BP and reports ongoing psychological stressors. Has declined to contact family members. Discussed emergency contact protocol. Patient remains non-compliant with personal support network recommendations. He sat with that sentence for a long time. Ongoing psychological stressors. He was the psychological stressor. The absence of him, the weight of what had happened, the specific burden of carrying a secret for 4 months while managing a high-risk pregnancy alone in a town where nobody knew her, he was that. The stressor wasn't abstract. It had his face. He pushed back from the table. He walked to the window. Boston in the early hours was not quiet. It was never truly quiet. But this neighborhood had a particular kind of subdued energy at this hour, the city holding its breath before the morning shift. He thought about what she would need, not what he wanted to give her. That was a different calculation, and he knew the difference, had learned the difference the hard way in the last 24 hours. What she would actually need. She would need stability. She would need to not be frightened. She would need him to understand that arriving on her doorstep with his full self, the force, and the weight, and the assumption of being accommodated, was exactly the wrong approach. He was very good at force. He had almost no practice in the other thing. He went back to the table and looked at the file. He had 3 hours until his attorney's office opened. He picked up a pen and started writing. Across the city, in an apartment in the South End that Dominic had leased for her 2 years ago and paid for automatically from an account he had stopped looking at closely, Kara Weston was not sleeping either. She was sitting on her couch with her knees pulled up and her phone on the cushion beside her, looking at the text thread between herself and a contact saved as MV, which were not Dominic's initials and were not anyone in Dominic's organization, were in fact the initials of a man named Marcus Veltri, who ran the Veltri family's operations out of Providence and had been quietly interested in Dominic Voss's empire for the better part of 3 years. The most recent text from Marcus, sent 40 minutes ago, said, "He's moving. We need to move first." Kara stared at it. She had not gotten into this for money, exactly. She had gotten into it the way certain ambitious people got into things, not from a single moment of decision, but from a gradual accumulation of small choices, each one defensible on its own, each one closing another door until the only door left open was the one that led here. She had been passing information to Marcus for 14 months. Meeting requests, financial routing, the names of officials Dominic had arrangements with. It had started as intelligence gathering. She had told herself it was insurance, that she needed leverage in a world where leverage was currency, and had evolved into something she had mostly stopped examining closely. But this was different. Elena was pregnant. That changed the calculation in ways Kara hadn't fully mapped. She hadn't planned for Elena to leave. She had understood that the gala would create fracture. That was the point, had been the point for months, the long patient work of occupying Dominic's attention and eroding his marriage from the inside. But Elena was supposed to stay. Elena was supposed to become a different kind of leverage, a domesticated presence that kept Dominic anchored and slightly distracted. Elena was not supposed to disappear into a coastal town and go off the radar and become a complication. She typed back to Marcus, "Give me 24 hours." His response came in under a minute. "You have 12. She put the phone down. She thought about what 12 hours meant and what would happen at the end of them if she didn't deliver something actionable. And the thing that happened in her chest when she thought about it was not quite fear. She had disciplined herself out of most fear responses years ago, but something close. Something that felt like the floor shifting. She had made too many moves that couldn't be unmade. She picked up the phone and made a call she had been avoiding for 3 days. The man who answered sounded like he had also not been sleeping. "We need to meet," Kara said. "It's 3 in the morning. I know what time it is. There's a situation that's accelerating and I need to give you something before it does." A long pause. The sound of someone sitting up in bed. "What kind of something?" said the voice on the other end. Detective Ray Okafor, Boston PD, Financial Crimes Division, and Kara's real insurance policy, the one she had been saving for exactly this kind of moment. "The kind that ends careers," Kara said, "and saves some lives, maybe." Hartley Cove woke up slowly. Elena had learned the town's rhythms over 2 months. The lobster boats left the harbor before 5, and the sound of their engines was the first thing that reached her room every morning, a low diesel rumble that she had come to find, surprisingly, comforting. The diner opened at 6:30. Della unlocked the motel office at 7 and put on coffee that was too strong and too good. Elena was awake before the boats left. She lay on her side in the dark with one hand resting on the curve of her stomach. 18 weeks now, and the evidence of her daughter was no longer something she pressed her hand against hoping to feel. It was simply there, present, a fact of her body. She had felt movement 3 days ago. The first time. A flutter so subtle she'd held her breath for 10 minutes, afraid to breathe in case she'd imagined it. She hadn't imagined it. She lay in the dark and breathed and listened to the boats and thought about her daughter, who was becoming more real every day, and less like a hope and more like a person with a heartbeat. Elena had heard on 3 different ultrasounds now, strong and steady, a sound that made her close her eyes every time because it undid her in a way nothing else did. She was thinking about names. She had started a list in the Notes app on her phone, nothing committed, just names she liked the sound of, names that felt like they belonged to someone sturdy and particular and not easily moved by the opinions of others. She had written and deleted 12 names so far. She kept coming back to one. She was thinking about it now when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Margot. She let it ring. Then, before it went to voicemail, she picked up. "Hey," she said. "Oh, thank God." Margot's voice came through high and fast, the voice of someone who had been rehearsing this conversation and was now abandoning the rehearsal. "Elena, okay, I need you to listen to me." "Margot, he knows where you are." Elena went still. "How?" she said, very quiet. "I don't know exactly, but he called me." "Elena, he called me 3 days ago, and I know I should have called you immediately, but I panicked. I thought he already knew everything, and I didn't want to make it worse, and what did you tell him?" "Nothing, I swear. I didn't confirm anything. But Elena, the way he was asking, he wasn't asking like he didn't know. He was asking like someone who already has the information and wants to see if the information is right." Elena sat up slowly. The room was still dark. The boats were beginning to move in the harbor. "Did he say he was coming?" she asked. "He didn't say anything specific. He asked if you were okay. He asked if you had what you needed." A breath. "He asked if you were alone." Elena pressed her free hand flat against the mattress. "I'm going to call you back," she said. "Elena, wait. I'm okay. I'll call you back." She ended the call. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a moment. Then she got up, went to the window, and looked out at the harbor. The last of the boats was moving toward the mouth of the water, its running light small and distant. She thought about what it meant, that he knew, that he had found her the way she had always, on some level, known he would eventually find her, because Dominic Voss did not lose things he had decided to find. She thought about what she would say to him. Then her phone rang again. Not Margot. Unknown number, Boston area code. This time she answered. Elena, his voice. She hadn't heard it in 2 months. It hit her in the sternum, not softly. "How long have you known where I am?" she said. A pause. 3 weeks. "And you're calling now because I found out everything else 3 weeks later." His voice was different, not the flat managed tone she associated with Dominic in professional mode. Something underneath it, something she didn't have an immediate category for. "I found out what you were trying to tell me. What you were trying to tell me for weeks before the gala. What my mother and Kara made sure I didn't hear." She said nothing. "Elena, He stopped, started again. "I need you to know what happened, what I didn't know was happening. I'm not using it as an excuse. I'm saying it because you deserve to know the actual picture." "The actual picture," she said carefully, "is that I walked into a hotel room. I know what you walked into. And the actual picture is that before I walked into that room, I had been trying to reach you for 3 weeks. I know. And every time something got in the way, and I kept telling myself one more try, one more, Elena." His voice cracked, just slightly, just enough. "I know. I've read everything. I know what she did with your calls. I know what my mother knew. I know you've been going to a cardiologist, and I know what that means for—" He stopped again. She heard him breathe. "I know about our daughter," the word daughter in his voice. She was not prepared for what that did to her. She was furious at herself for not being prepared. "I'm not calling to come get you," he said. "I'm not calling to tell you to come home. I needed you to know that it wasn't—" A long pause. "It wasn't that I didn't care. It wasn't that. It was that I built a life where the people around me had reasons to keep me from knowing things, and I let them, because it was easier than paying attention, and I am going to have to live with that. I know that." Elena stood at the window. The harbor was lightening with the first suggestion of dawn. Gray turning to rose, the water beginning to hold color. She thought about 3 weeks of trying to tell him. She thought about the phone calls. She thought about Kara's hand on the tablet and Catherine's voice and the way the suite door had been slightly open, like an invitation or a trap. She still couldn't say which. She thought about the flutter she had felt 3 days ago. "I have a doctor's appointment on Thursday," she said finally. Silence on his end. "You're not invited," she said. "But I'm telling you because you asked if I was okay, and that's the answer. I have an appointment Thursday, and I'm managing it. Is there anything you need?" She almost said no. The word was already forming, already on its way, the reflexive, armored no that she had been living inside for 2 months. "I need you to not show up here," she said instead. "I need you to let me be in charge of the pace of whatever this is. If you show up unannounced, I won't answer the door. I need you to understand that completely." "I understand." "I mean it, Dominic." "I know you do." A pause. "I'm not coming. Not yet. Not until it makes sense." She pressed her forehead against the glass. It was cold. The cold felt clarifying. "I'll call you," she said. "I don't know when." "Okay." She ended the call. She stood there for a long time with the phone against her chest and her forehead against the glass and the harbor going pink outside, and her heart beating, carefully, watchfully, the way it always did, the way it had to. Dominic sat with the ended call in his hand for a long time before he set the phone down. She would call. Or she wouldn't. He had said he understood, and he had meant it, and he was going to have to find a way to sit inside that understanding without doing what every instinct he possessed was screaming at him to do, which was to get in the car and drive 3 hours south and fix it. He could not fix this the way he fixed things. That was the lesson he was only beginning to understand the full weight of. He looked at the papers still spread on the kitchen table. Elena's medical file, the attorney's notes from the morning call, and underneath everything, a single sheet he had printed and folded and been carrying in his jacket pocket for 2 days. The Galloway report summary, the one with the line about ongoing psychological stressors and non-compliant with personal support network recommendations. He unfolded it one more time. He read it one more time. Then his phone lit up with a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go. Then something, some instinct, the animal alertness that had kept him alive for 20 years in a world full of men who wanted what he had, made him answer. "Mr. Voss," said a voice he didn't recognize. "My name is Detective Ray Okafor, Financial Crimes, Boston PD. I think we need to meet. I have information about your operation that came to me through an unusual source, and some of it concerns your wife's safety directly." Dominic went very still. "What source?" he said. "Kara Weston," said the detective. "She came to me 4 hours ago. She's been feeding your operational details to Marcus Veltri for over a year, and from what she's telling me, the Veltri family knows enough about your current vulnerabilities to make a move. Soon." A pause. "She also told me that your wife's location may have been passed to them, as additional leverage if they need it." The room seemed to contract. Elena's location. A coastal town. A motel. A woman alone, pregnant, with a cardiac condition, and no security, and no one who knew who she actually was. "When did Veltri get her location?" Dominic said. His voice was completely flat. The flatness of someone who has just stepped off a cliff and hasn't yet processed the fall. "We don't know exactly. Sometime in the last 48 hours is our best estimate." Dominic was already standing, already moving toward the door, his keys in his hand before the detective had finished the sentence, the calculation running, 3 hours to Hartley Cove, 2 if he pushed it, the call to Marco already forming in his mind, the assets he could deploy in the next 30 minutes to get someone there before he could. "Mr. Voss," Okafor said, "I need you to understand that if you go in there with your people, it creates a situation." "I understand what it creates," Dominic said. "I'm going to need you to work very quickly, detective, because I'm going to get to my wife before anyone else does, and I don't particularly care what that looks like on your end." He was already out the door. He was already in the car. He drove south with both hands on the wheel and the speedometer climbing and the October dark stretching out in front of him. And for the first time in 20 years of building something designed to make him untouchable, Dominic Voss understood with complete and irreversible clarity that the only thing in his life that had ever actually mattered was 3 hours away in a motel room with a succulent on the windowsill. And he had spent 4 years failing to protect it, and now someone else had noticed. And the window for fixing that mistake was closing with every mile that passed beneath him. He pressed the accelerator to the floor. The city fell away behind him. He made it in 2 hours and 11 minutes. He didn't remember most of the drive the way a person remembers things they are fully present for. He remembered the speedometer. He remembered calling Marco at some point past the Braintree split and telling him to get two men to Hartley Cove by whatever means were fastest. And Marco asking no questions because Marco had been reading Dominic's voice for 15 years and knew the specific register of this is not a discussion. He remembered the GPS announcing exits he didn't take because he knew Route 3 better than the GPS did. He remembered the sky beginning to lighten somewhere around Plymouth, the horizon going from black to a deep, indeterminate gray, and thinking that it looked exactly like the inside of his chest felt. He did not call Elena. He had decided this somewhere around the 40-minute mark, after he'd picked up the phone 3 times and put it back down. If he called her, she would know something was wrong before he got there. If she knew something was wrong before he got there, she would do the thing she had been doing for the last 2 months, which was handle it alone. And her handling things alone was the entire problem, had been the entire problem for longer than he'd been willing to admit. He pulled into Hartley Cove at 5:47 in the morning. The town was barely awake. The harbor smell hit him when he rolled down the window, salt and diesel and cold October air, the specific combination of a working waterfront before the tourists arrive. He had the motel's address from Galloway's report, and he found it in 4 minutes. A 2-story building called the Sea Anchor, white clapboard with green shutters, a vacancy sign still lit in the office window. He sat in the car for 30 seconds. Then he got out. The lobby was unlocked. A woman in her 60s was behind the desk with reading glasses on her forehead and a coffee mug, and the expression of someone who had been awake for hours and was not surprised to see a man in an expensive coat walk in before 6 in the morning because she had seen stranger. "We don't have vacancies," she said. "I'm not looking for a room. I'm looking for Elena Ashford, 2nd floor." The woman, her name was Della, and Dominic understood this from the nameplate on the desk, looked at him with the particular assessment of someone who has been appointed, without any official sanction, as the primary protector of a woman who arrived alone and asked no questions about the world outside her door. "She's not expecting you," Della said. "No, she's not." He met her eyes. "There's a situation developing that she doesn't know about. I need to be in a position to protect her before it arrives. I'm asking you to tell me which room." "You're him," Della said, not a question. "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. He let her look. He did not try to manage the look or redirect it. He stood there and let this woman, who had been bringing soup to his pregnant wife for 2 months, read whatever she could find in his face. She put down her coffee mug. 2:14, she said. "If she tells you to leave, you leave." "Understood." He was already moving toward the stairs. He knocked twice. Quietly. Silence. Then movement. The sound of feet on a wood floor. Cautious. "Who is it?" Her voice, close to the door. "Me," he said. A long pause. Long enough that he started to believe she wouldn't open it. Then the lock turned. She opened the door 6 inches and looked at him through the gap. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt and dark leggings, and her hair was down, and she looked like she hadn't slept, and she looked like herself. Not the version of herself that had moved through his life in tailored dresses and careful composure, performing the function of a Mafia king's wife. Just herself. Barefaced and tired and real in the particular way that people are real when they have been surviving hard things without anyone watching. He looked at her face for 2 seconds. Then his eyes moved involuntarily to the visible curve beneath the sweatshirt. Something moved in his chest. "You said you weren't coming," she said. "I know. Something changed." He kept his voice low. "I need to come in. I'll explain, and then if you want me to leave, I'll leave. But I need 60 seconds first." She looked at him. She opened the door. He told her quickly. No preamble, no softening. She was not the kind of person who processed fear better with softening, and he knew that much about her at least. He told her about Kara and Okafor and the Veltri family and the 48-hour window during which her location may have been passed to people who understood that Dominic Voss's vulnerable point was not his money or his network, but whatever he was currently racing toward. She sat on the edge of the bed while he talked. Her hands were in her lap, very still. She had the quality some people had of becoming more contained when frightened, not less, pulling inward, organizing herself around the center. When he finished, she said, "How long do we have?" "I don't know. Marco is 20 minutes out. He has 2 men with him." "And the police?" "Okafor is working a parallel track. He wants clean arrests, which means he'd prefer I not—" He stopped. "It's complicated." "Is he trustworthy?" "I think so. Kara wouldn't have gone to him if she thought he was dirty. Elena looked at the window. The curtain was drawn. She reached out and pulled it back, carefully, one finger, and looked at the parking lot below. 4 cars. One she recognized as a rental, 2 that belonged to other guests, 1 she didn't know. She dropped the curtain. "There's a car out there," she said. "Blue sedan. It was there when I went to bed last night. It wasn't there yesterday afternoon." Dominic was already at the window. He looked through the gap in the curtain at the blue sedan, parked at an angle that gave the driver clear sight lines to both the motel entrance and the staircase. He pulled out his phone and called Marco. "Blue sedan in the lot," he said when Marco answered. "Rhode Island plates. Run it." 2 minutes, Marco said. Dominic kept his eyes on the car. No movement. Tinted windows. Not heavily, but enough. "How long has it been there?" he asked Elena. "I checked the lot at 11 when I couldn't sleep. It wasn't there then. I noticed it at 2 when I got up for water. 3 to 4 hours. Which meant they'd arrived before Okafor had even called Dominic. Which meant the Veltri family's timeline was ahead of what the detective had estimated. Marco called back in 90 seconds. "Registered to a holding company out of Providence," Marco said. "The company is 2 years old and has no other assets." Providence. Veltri. "How far out are you?" Dominic said. 12 minutes. He looked at Elena. She was watching his face, reading the call the way she had always been good at reading things that weren't said directly. It was one of the things he had noticed about her early and had taken for granted and was now recalibrating. 12 minutes, he told her. "What do we do for 12 minutes?" "We don't go near the windows, and we don't go near the door." He looked around the room, small, 2 exits, the main door, and a bathroom with a window that opened onto a fire escape on the building's north side. "Bathroom window. Does it open?" "Yes." "If anything happens before Marco gets here, you go out that window. There's a fire escape. You go down and you go north, away from the parking lot toward the harbor. You don't wait for me." "Dominic, you don't wait for me." His voice came out harder than he intended. He adjusted. "Please. You don't wait." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, once, the nod of someone filing information under things that may become necessary. They waited. The 12 minutes felt like they had mass. Elena sat on the edge of the bed and he stood near the door, and neither of them spoke for a while, and the silence between them was different from the silences they had shared in the last year of their marriage. Those silences had been hollow, avoidant, 2 people not talking because the things they needed to say had become too heavy to lift. This silence was taut, present. 2 people not talking because they were listening. "At the 9-minute mark," she said, "I was going to name her Nora." He looked at her. "I've been making a list," she said. "I keep coming back to Nora." He didn't say anything. The words sat in the room between them. Nora, small and complete and somehow more real than anything else that had happened in the last 8 hours. "It's a good name," he said finally. She looked at her hands. His phone vibrated. "Marco. In position, south entrance. 2 men at lot perimeter. Blue sedan has 1 occupant visible, possibly 2. Then, 10 seconds later. Second vehicle entering lot from north. Dark SUV. This isn't surveillance. They're moving." Dominic said, "Go. Bathroom window. Now." Elena stood. She didn't argue. She had heard something in his voice that bypassed the part of her that was angry at him and went straight to the part that had learned, in 4 years married to this man, that when he used that particular tone, argument was a luxury they didn't have. She moved to the bathroom. I was right behind her. The window was small, older construction, painted shut at some point, and then pried open and painted again, the kind of window that required both hands and a specific angle. Elena got it open. Cold air flooded in, carrying harbor salt. "I can't." She stopped. She looked at the opening, then at herself, at the curve of her stomach that had changed the geometry of most physical situations. "I'll help you through," he said. "I'm fine." "Elena." He moved beside her. "Let me help you." She looked at him. Something crossed her face. Not surrender, not softness, but the pragmatic acknowledgement of someone who had been alone for 2 months and was now not alone, and had not yet decided what to do with that. She let him help her. He got her through the window onto the fire escape landing, careful, both hands, the old metal groaning slightly under the new weight. She grabbed the railing. She was steady. "North," he said. "Harbor." "I know." She looked back at him through the window. "What about you?" "Marco's here. I'll be fine." "That's not—" She stopped. "Don't do anything that—" She stopped again. Her jaw tightened. Don't die doing something stupid. He almost said something that would have been wrong, something that would have tried to be reassuring in the way of a man who is about to do something risky and knows it. Instead, he just looked at her for 1 second, her face framed by the window, her hand on the railing, her presence suddenly so vivid and specific that it was like seeing her for the first time in years. Go, he said. She went. He watched her begin to descend, steady and careful, one hand on the rail and one hand instinctively moving to her stomach, and then he turned back to the room. The door came in 30 seconds later. Not kicked in, professionally opened, the lock manipulated in under 8 seconds by someone who had done it hundreds of times. The two men who entered were not large or theatrical. They were compact and quiet, and moved like people for whom entering a room against someone's will was simply a task to be completed. They found Dominic standing in the center of the room with his hands visible. "He's not here," said the first man, meaning Marcus Veltri. "No," Dominic said. "He sent you, though. How many outside?" Neither man answered. "3?" Dominic said. "4? Marcus never sends more than 4. He's conservative with personnel. I've always respected that about him." He kept his voice level, conversational, the way he used it in negotiations where the other party needed to feel like they were in control. "Here's what I need you to understand. My wife just went down the north fire escape. She's pregnant and she has a cardiac condition, and whoever is outside on the north side of this building is going to let her pass without any contact whatsoever, or what happens in this room is going to be significantly worse for everyone involved." The first man pulled out a phone, sent a text. They waited. Dominic watched the man's face. A response came. The man showed it to his partner. Something passed between them. Not words, just the slight readjustment of two men recalibrating a situation. "Marcus wants to meet," the first man said. "I know he does." "You'll come?" "Tell him to come here," Dominic said. "Tell him I'm not getting in a car in the dark with his people. Tell him if he has something to say to me, he says it to my face, in a place I choose, with my people present. He wants to negotiate, we negotiate. He wants a war. He should know that I burned half my own infrastructure this week, and I have significantly less to lose than he's assuming." The man sent another text. Dominic stood very still and thought about Elena on the fire escape, moving down toward the harbor in the cold, and the sound of her voice saying, "Don't die doing something stupid," and the word Nora hanging in the air between them. The phone buzzed. The man read it. "He agrees," he said. 1 hour. He wants the diner on Main. The Anchor Diner. Elena's diner. Dominic almost said no on instinct. Too close, too much of her space. Then he reconsidered. He knew that space. He'd seen it in Galloway's report. He did not know Marcus Veltri's chosen location, and familiarity was its own kind of advantage. 1 hour, he said. Tell him to come alone. He walked to the door. The two men moved aside, not from deference, but because Marco and one of his men were now visible in the corridor, and the arithmetic of the situation had shifted. Dominic walked out. Elena was at the harbor. She had made it down the fire escape without falling, which she was taking as a personal victory, and had walked north through the cold with her arms wrapped around herself, and her breath coming in visible clouds, and her heart doing its careful, monitored thing, not misbehaving, just working. She could feel it working. She found the harbor at the end of a short street lined with bait shops and a boat repair outfit that wasn't open yet. The dock was empty at this hour. The water was dark and very still. She sat on a wooden piling and waited. Her phone had been in her sweatshirt pocket. She pulled it out. She thought about calling Dr. Finch. She thought about calling Margot. She thought about calling Della to make sure the motel was okay. She thought about Dominic's face in the window. She pressed her hand against her stomach. "We're okay," she said. She wasn't sure if she was telling her daughter or herself or both. "We're okay." The harbor smelled like everything she had come to associate with the last 2 months. The particular smell of a life being rebuilt from scratch, which turned out to smell like salt and cold, and the specific cleanness of air that had nothing to prove. Footsteps on the dock. She turned. Marco appeared at the end of the dock, hands visible, moving carefully. Behind him, one of his men held back. "Mrs. Voss," Marco said, "are you hurt?" "Ashford," she said automatically. Then she stopped. She looked at him. "No, I'm not hurt." He nodded. He moved closer, close enough to talk quietly. "He's okay. There was nothing happened inside. He's working on the other piece now." "What other piece?" "Marcus Veltri." A pause. It's above my pay grade to explain all of it, but he's handling it. He's handling it, she repeated. Marco said nothing. She looked out at the harbor. The sky had continued to lighten while she'd been sitting here, and Hartley Cove was beginning to show itself in the early morning. The boat slips, the seafood shacks with their handwritten signs, the particular modesty of a town that had no interest in impressing anyone. She had loved it here, in the way you love places that let you be invisible. She was not going to be invisible anymore. She understood that now. Dominic had found her, which meant the shape of her life was about to change whether she controlled it or not. The only question was whether she changed it on her own terms or let it happen to her. She was very tired of letting things happen to her. I need to go inside, she said. I need to eat something and sit somewhere warm. I'll take you, Marco said. I know the way. She stood up from the piling. Her back ached. Her feet were cold. She was 19 weeks pregnant, and she had just descended a fire escape in the dark, and she had not taken her morning medications yet, which she needed to do in the next 30 minutes. She started walking back toward Main Street. Marco fell into step slightly behind her, which was the right instinct, present but not presuming. She walked. The Anchor Diner had not opened yet, but Pete was inside doing prep. She could see him through the window as she approached, moving between the counter and the kitchen with the methodical efficiency of a man who had opened this place every morning for 20 years and had his rituals. She knocked on the glass. Pete looked up. He unlocked the door. "You're early," he said. Then he saw Marco. Then he looked at Elena's face. "You look like you walked here from somewhere cold." "Kind of," she said. He held the door open without asking more questions. She went in. The diner smelled like coffee and bacon grease and the specific warmth of a place that has been the same temperature since before you were born. Elena sat at the counter on her regular stool, second from the left, the one where she could see both the door and the kitchen pass, and put her elbows on the counter and breathed. Pete put a mug of decaf in front of her without being asked. She wrapped her hands around it. She sat with the warmth in her hands and the coffee smell and the sound of Pete starting to crack eggs in the kitchen. And she thought about the fact that in approximately 35 minutes, the man she had left 2 months ago was going to sit down in this room with a man who wanted to use her as leverage, and however that conversation ended was going to determine the shape of the next chapter of her life. The door opened. She turned. Not Marco. Not Dominic. Marcus Veltri was 52, with the particular build of a man who had been athletic 20 years ago and had since converted the physicality into something more deliberate, heavier, but not soft, the kind of presence that arrived in a room and reorganized it. He was alone, as agreed. He wore a dark coat. He looked at Elena on her stool with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. "You must be Elena," he said. She looked at him. "You're early," she said. "So are you." He moved to the stool 3 down from her. He didn't sit. He just stood with his hand on the back of it, looking at her. "I want you to know that the situation tonight was not meant to—" "Don't," she said. He stopped. "Don't explain it to me," she said. "Don't manage me. I've had enough of men who think what they're doing is something other than what it is." She picked up her mug. "My husband will be here in 30 minutes. If you have things to say, you say them to him." Marcus looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, not admiration exactly. More like reassessment. He pulled out the stool and sat down. Pete appeared at the pass window, looked at Marcus, looked at Elena. "Coffee?" Pete said. "Please," said Marcus Veltri. The 3 of them sat in the strange quiet of a diner not yet open, with the harbor outside going fully light now and the morning arriving with its complete indifference to what had happened in the dark. And Elena wrapped her hands around her mug and kept her eyes on the door and waited for Dominic to walk through it. She heard her own heartbeat, steady, watchful, working. She pressed her hand against her stomach once, briefly, under the counter where no one could see. Then the door opened, and Dominic walked in, and the last piece of the night fell into place, and nothing that came next was going to be simple. But at least now they were all in the same room, and Elena Ashford, who had spent 2 months learning how to survive without anyone, was sitting at the counter of her diner with her coffee going warm in her hands, waiting for the reckoning that should have Dominic walk through the door of the Anchor Diner at 6:23 in the morning. And the first thing he saw was Elena at the counter with her hands wrapped around a mug, and the second thing he saw was Marcus Veltri 3 stools down from her, and the third thing he registered, not visually but in some older part of his awareness, was that Elena had positioned herself exactly between the 2 exits. She had done that deliberately. He understood, in that moment, that she had spent 2 months becoming someone he didn't fully know yet. He moved to the counter. He didn't look at Veltri immediately. He looked at Elena first, a question in the look, a quick inventory. And she gave him a small nod that meant, "I'm fine, do what you came here to do." He pulled out the stool next to her and sat down. Pete appeared at the pass window, looked at the three of them with the expression of a man who had seen enough of life to know when not to ask questions, and disappeared back into the kitchen. Dominic turned to Veltri. Marcus Veltri looked back at him with the patient attention of a man who had been waiting for this conversation for 3 years and was willing to wait another 10 minutes if the situation required it. "You sent 2 men into my wife's motel room," Dominic said. "I sent 2 men to confirm a location," Veltri said. "That's different." "In what way?" "In the way that your wife is sitting next to you unharmed, and if my intentions had been what you're implying, she wouldn't be." Dominic let that sit. It was technically accurate, which made it worse to hear, not better. "You've been running an asset inside my organization for 14 months, Dominic said. "I've been gathering information," Veltri said. "That's not the same as running an asset." "You're very committed to these distinctions." "I'm committed to being precise." Veltri wrapped both hands around the coffee mug Pete had left. He had the manner of a man who had learned that calmness was a more effective weapon than aggression, which meant he and Dominic had been shaped by the same school. "You want to know what I know. I want to know what you're willing to do with what's left of your operation. This doesn't have to be a war, Dominic. It never did." "Then why the room?" "Because I needed you here." A pause. "And you weren't going to drive 3 hours south at 5 in the morning for a phone call." The honesty of it was almost disarming. Almost. "Say what you came to say," Dominic said. Veltri set down his mug. He looked at Dominic with the specific directness of a man who has decided to skip the performance and get to the transaction. "Your organization in Boston is compromised," Veltri said. "Not by me, by the exposure that Weston created when she went to the police. Okafor is good. He's been building a case for 18 months, and what Kara gave him filled in the last gaps. You're looking at federal involvement within 60 days. He paused. "I'm not here to take what you have. There's nothing left worth taking. I'm here because I want to make an arrangement about what comes after." "What comes after," Dominic said slowly, "is not your business." "It becomes my business if the vacuum you leave gets filled by people who are less conservative than I am. You know what's east of Providence, Dominic. You know who's been waiting for either of us to stumble." He looked at his coffee. "I'm not your enemy. I've never been your enemy. I've been a competitor who made the mistake of using a compromised channel, and now we're both sitting in a diner in a town I've never heard of at 6 in the morning, which is not where either of us expected to end up." The kitchen sounds continued behind the pass window, the smell of bacon, the ordinary machinery of a morning that didn't know or care about any of this. Elena had not moved. She was very still beside Dominic, her hand still around her mug, and he was aware of her stillness the way he had always been aware of her when she was in a room. Not consciously, but the way you're aware of your own pulse. "I'm not making arrangements," Dominic said. "Not with you, not with anyone. I'm done with arrangements." Veltri looked at him. "You're walking away," Veltri said. Not a question. More like a man confirming a variable he had considered and assigned low probability to. "I'm walking away." "Everything my father is gone." The same words he had said to his mother 2 nights ago in the same flat tone. "What he built belonged to him. What I built belongs to me, and I'm choosing what to do with it." Veltri was quiet for a moment. He looked at Elena, then back at Dominic. "She knows what you are," Veltri said quietly. "She knows what I was," Dominic said. Something shifted in Veltri's face. Not agreement. More like the recalibration of a man who had built his model of Dominic Voss on 20 years of evidence and was now encountering a data point that didn't fit the model. He picked up his coffee. Drank. "I'll need assurances about certain parties we have in common," Veltri said finally. "The officials who have arrangements with both of us. I need to know how you're handling those relationships before you walk away." "Okafor," Dominic said. "That's his job." "You're handing it to the police." "I'm handing it to the police." Veltri stared at him. I know what it is," Dominic said. "It's the only version where my daughter grows up without inheriting this." The word daughter in that sentence, in that room, had a specific gravity. Veltri heard it. He looked at Elena's profile, at the visible evidence of the pregnancy under the sweatshirt, and something crossed his face that was too complicated to name. The look of a man who had made certain calculations about leverage and was now understanding that the leverage had changed shape. He put down the mug. He stood. "I'll be in touch with my attorney," Veltri said. for the transition of the shared accounts. That should be enough for the federal angle to be manageable. Dominic said nothing. Veltri looked at Elena one more time. I'm sorry for this morning, he said. Genuinely. Elena looked up at him. Noted, she said. He left. The diner door closed. The bell above it rang once, small and ordinary. Pete appeared from the kitchen. You two want breakfast? Elena let out a breath she had been holding for approximately 40 minutes. Yes, she said. Absolutely yes. They sat there for an hour. Pete made eggs and toast and hash browns and didn't ask questions, and Dominic and Elena sat at the counter and ate, and the town outside woke up around them, the first foot traffic on Main Street, a couple of fishermen coming in for coffee, Della from the motel appearing at 7:15 with her reading glasses on her forehead and giving Dominic a look that communicated, with considerable economy, that she had not yet decided what she thought of him. They didn't talk about Veltri. They didn't talk about Kara or Catherine or what the next 60 days were going to look like. All of that was real. All of it was coming, and there would be time for it. They talked about the eggs. They talked about the diner. Elena described Pete and the dropped tray of mugs, and the way the regulars had been patient with her while she was learning, and Dominic listened in the way he was trying to teach himself to listen, which was without already composing his response. He asked about the name. Nora, Elena said. She was pushing the last of her hash browns around. It means honor, technically, but that's not why. It just sounds like someone who knows who she is. Dominic looked at his coffee. It's a good name, he said again. Because it was, and because he didn't have anything more useful to say. And he was learning, slowly, the value of saying the true small thing instead of the large, impressive thing. Elena looked at him sideways. You hate it. I don't hate it. You have the face you make when you're tolerating something. I don't have that face. You absolutely have that face. You've had it since the first time I ordered fish at Trevino's. He looked at her. She was looking at her plate with the corner of her mouth doing something that was not quite a smile but was in the same territory. It hit him somewhere in the sternum. That almost smile. He had not seen it in he didn't know how long enough that it felt like something recovered from a wreck. I don't hate the name, he said. I think it's... He stopped, started again. I think she's going to be difficult to argue with, based on available evidence. Elena's almost smile became an actual one, small and brief and quickly managed. But he'd seen it, he stored it. Marco and his men left Hartley Cove by 9. Before Marco got in the car, he stopped in front of Dominic and stood there for a moment in the way of someone who had prepared nothing and was working with what he had. For what it's worth, Marco said, I always thought Elena was the best thing you had going. Dominic looked at him. That's worth something. You need me? You call. He looked at the motel, at the Sea Anchor sign, at the quiet coastal street. This is a good town. It is, Dominic said. Marco left. Dominic stood in the parking lot for a moment in the cold. He could see Elena through the diner window. She had stayed inside, was talking to Pete, her hands moving in the way they did when she was explaining something she cared about. He watched her through the glass and felt something that didn't have a name in his vocabulary yet, something that might have been hope, but was rawer than hope, less certain, more honest. He took out his phone. He called Okafor. Veltri will cooperate, he said, when the detective answered. The shared municipal accounts. I'll send you documentation by end of day. Full picture. A pause. And you? Okafor said. I'm going to need an attorney, Dominic said, and I'm going to need some time. You understand this doesn't... I understand what it doesn't do, Dominic said. I'm not looking for absolution. I'm looking for the outcome that ends this cleanly. Another pause. I can work with that, Okafor said. Dominic ended the call. He looked at the phone in his hand, the long list of names in it, the 20 years of architecture it represented, the entire machinery of a life he had been building since before he was old enough to understand what he was building toward. He put the phone in his coat pocket. I went back inside. The conversation about the pregnancy happened that afternoon. They had moved from the diner to Elena's room where she finally took her morning medications. He watched her line them up on the bathroom counter with the automatic precision of someone who had been managing her own health alone for a long time. And he felt the specific shame of that, quiet and persistent, and then sat in the chair by the window while he sat on the edge of the bed. She told him everything. The fertility treatments, which she had been going to alone for a year before the pregnancy because she hadn't wanted to pressure him about something she wasn't sure he wanted. The failed attempts. The way she had sat in a pharmacy parking lot and cried when the test came back positive because the relief was so enormous and so complicated that her body didn't know what else to do with it. She told him about the 3 weeks of trying to tell him. The specific moments, Tuesday morning in the kitchen when his phone rang and he took the call and walked out. Thursday evening when she'd set the table for dinner and he hadn't come home until midnight. The night she'd waited up until 2 and then taken the test out of her nightstand just to look at it, to make sure it was still real. She told him about the gala, the dress, the room. He let her tell it without interruption, which was the hardest thing he had done in the last 24 hours and possibly in recent memory. He had a strong instinct to explain himself at each point, not defensively, just to fill the space that the truth left behind, and he overrode it each time. He listened. When she finished, the room was quiet. "I'm sorry," he said. He had said it before, on the phone, and he'd meant it then, but saying it now, in person, in the specific room where she had been surviving this alone, had a different weight. Not for the way I'm supposed to say it. I'm sorry because I know what I didn't pay attention to. I know what I told myself to justify that, and I can't. He stopped. There's no version of this where I can make that right. I know that. I'm not here asking you to pretend otherwise. Elena looked at the succulent on the windowsill. New leaves. She looked at it for a long moment. I know you're not, she said. What I can do. He stopped again, because the impulse he had was to list the things he could do, to inventory his capabilities and present them as a plan, which was how he solved every other problem in his life. He understood, sitting in this room, that this was not that kind of problem. I want to be here, he said, simpler. Not managing things, not running things, just here, if you'll let me. Elena turned to look at him. She had thought about this moment many times in the last 2 months, had imagined it in various versions, some where she was cold and clear, some where she said things she'd been storing up, some where she simply closed the door. She had not imagined this version, which was the two of them in a small motel room in a coastal town in October, both exhausted, both unmade in different ways by the same damage, with a name between them, Nora, that had changed the stakes of everything. I can't go back to Boston, she said. I know. I mean it, that house, that life. I can't rebuild inside it. I'm not going to. I'm not asking you to. She looked at him steadily. You're asking me something. You're just being careful about how you ask it. He held her gaze. I'm asking if there's a version where I earn the right to be in the room when our daughter is born. That's all I'm asking right now. The room held that. Outside, a boat horn sounded from the harbor, low and distant, the sound of something heading out to open water. You're going to have to be patient, Elena said. In a way you've never had to be patient before. Not strategic patient, not waiting for the right moment patient, actually patient, the kind where you don't know how it ends and you stay anyway. I know. You don't know yet, she said, not unkindly, but you might learn. She looked back at the window. The harbor light was doing something particular in the late afternoon, turning the water a pale, hammered silver, the kind of light that made everything look like it had just come through something and was assessing the damage. You can stay, she said, in Hartley Cove. Not in this room. There's a rental on Margin Street. Della mentioned it last week. Someone moving out at the end of the month. You stay there, you give me space, you show up when I ask you to show up. Okay? And you don't run anything from here. No business, no calls at midnight, no Marco parked outside. Okay? I mean it, Dominic. I know you do, he said. That's why I'm not arguing. She looked at him for a long moment, doing the calculation she had been doing for 2 months, the accounting of damage against the accounting of what was still real. He could see her doing it, and he made himself sit still inside it, made himself let her take the time without trying to tip the scale. Okay, she said. It was not forgiveness. He understood that. It was a door, crack it open, with specific conditions attached, and behind the conditions was a question that only time could answer. He could work with that. He had been given worse odds. Catherine Voss received the legal documents on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after Hartley Cove. She was at the Newport house, which was, as she had told Dominic, hers technically, untouched by the restructuring he had done to everything else. She sat in the sitting room with the documents in her lap, and read them with the careful attention she applied to everything, even things she had decided to hate before she'd finished reading. The summary was this. She was removed from every board, every account, every structure that she had inhabited for 30 years as the power behind the power. The foundation. The investment vehicles. The informal arrangements with 3 different city council members that had required her particular social fluency to maintain. Gone. There was a note attached, handwritten, in Dominic's specific cramped script. You told me she was never suited for this life. You were right, but not the way you meant. She was never suited for a life where love was a strategy. Neither was I, though it took me longer to understand that. I hope you find something worth having that you didn't have to engineer. Catherine sat with the note for a long time. She did not call him. She understood, reading his handwriting, that the door for certain calls had closed. She folded the note. She put it in the documents. She set the documents on the side table. She sat alone in the Newport house for a long time, in the particular silence of someone who has spent 40 years managing a world and has just been informed that the world has moved on without her, and what that felt like was not what she had expected it to feel like. It felt, she realized slowly, like what it actually was. Kara Weston's arrangement with Okafor produced, over 6 weeks of documented cooperation, enough material to close the 18-month financial crimes case, expose the full structure of the Veltri information pipeline, and implicate 2 city officials in the kind of arrangements that ended careers and occasionally ended freedom. The federal involvement that Veltri had predicted did materialize, but in a form that was, as he had said, with his infuriating precision, manageable, given the degree of cooperation offered by both him and, ultimately, Dominic. Dominic spent 14 hours with federal attorneys over 3 sessions. He handed over documentation that put the capstone on a case they had been building for years. He walked away with what his own attorney called an outcome that reflects the unusual circumstances, which meant not clean, not free, but survivable. A suspended sentence contingent on continued cooperation and the verifiable dismantling of what remained of his criminal infrastructure. Financial penalties that reduced his assets significantly without eliminating them. He paid the penalties. He signed the documents. He shook no one's hand and made no statements to any press. He drove back to Hartley Cove. The rental on Margin Street was a 2-bedroom house that smelled like previous occupants and needed the kitchen faucet replaced, which Dominic fixed himself over a Tuesday afternoon with a YouTube tutorial and several failed attempts and a degree of satisfaction he had not anticipated. He had never fixed anything with his hands before, in a literal sense. He had always had people for that. He did not have people anymore, or rather, he had chosen not to use the ones he had for the things he used to use them for. He learned Hartley Cove slowly. He learned which coffee was better at the Anchor versus the place at the end of the Harbor Road. He learned that Pete's pie was transcendent, but his soup was inexplicably terrible, and that Pete was aware of this and didn't care. He learned Della's rhythm, the days she was sharp and the days she was tired, and the difference in her greeting depending on which one it was. He learned Elena's new rhythms. Not by shadowing her, he was careful about that, about the difference between present and intrusive, which was a distinction he had to consciously maintain. But Hartley Cove was small, and their orbits overlapped in the natural way of 2 people sharing a small geography. She texted him sometimes. Not often, not warmly, but specifically, which meant she had thought about it before doing it. Dr. Finch moved the appointment to Friday. Pete found a used rocking chair for cheap. Come look at it if you want. Small dispatches from the life she was running, offered at a pace she controlled completely. He answered them the same way, short, specific. He asked no questions she hadn't invited. He offered nothing she hadn't asked for. He was patient, the real kind. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, and he had done things that had cost him sleep for years. Elena went into labor at 34 weeks. It was November, a Tuesday night, and there was a storm coming up the coast. Not the catastrophic kind, just the November Atlantic kind, which was bad enough. She had been awake since midnight with contractions that were too close together, and she had done the thing she had promised Dr. Finch she would do, which was call the clinic first and not the motel office, and not Dominic and not Margot, and not try to determine on her own whether it was real. It was real. Dr. Finch met her at the clinic at 1:45 in the morning. By 2:15 after the assessment, she said what Elena had been afraid to hear. 6 weeks early, the baby's position was correct, but Elena's blood pressure had spiked in a way that required immediate intervention and transfer to the regional hospital in Mill Haven, 40 minutes north. I need to call someone, Elena said. Yes, Dr. Finch said. You do. She called Dominic. He answered on the second ring, which meant he hadn't been asleep. She registered that, filed it, didn't examine it. It's time, she said. I need you to drive me to Mill Haven. There was a half-second pause that she understood was him organizing himself. I'm coming, he said. 8 minutes. He was there in 7. He came through the clinic door with his coat half buttoned and his hair not right, and his face doing something she hadn't seen it do very often in 4 years of marriage. Open, unmanaged, all of whatever he was feeling fully present on the surface. He looked at her on the exam table. He looked at the monitors. Tell me what you need, he said. I need you to drive and not talk and not make it about anything except getting there, she said. Okay. If something happens, she stopped. Nothing is going to happen. If something happens, you make the call that's best for Nora. Not for me. For her. His jaw tightened. Elena, say it, she said. I need you to say it. He looked at her, the open face, everything on the surface. I'll do what's best for Nora, he said. The words came out with difficulty, which was how she knew he meant them. Okay, she said. Let's go. The drive to Mill Haven took 39 minutes in a November storm. Dominic drove at the exact speed that was as fast as possible without being reckless. She noticed this, the calibration of it, the discipline. And he did not talk as promised. He kept both hands on the wheel. He turned the heat up without being asked. Twice, she made a sound she couldn't fully suppress. He reached across with one hand and put it over hers on the armrest, and she let it stay, and neither of them said anything. The hospital was ready for them. Dr. Finch had called ahead. 2 nurses met them at the entrance with a wheelchair and the kind of efficiency that was either terrifying or reassuring depending on your capacity for optimism. Elena's capacity for optimism had been tested in most of its dimensions. She chose to find it reassuring. They took her to a room. Dominic followed to the door and then stopped when a nurse blocked him, gently, professionally, and said, Are you family? He looked at Elena. She looked at him. He's the father, she said. The nurse stepped aside. Nora Voss arrived at 4:41 in the morning, 6 weeks early, and screaming, which the neonatologist said was the best possible outcome. The screaming meant lungs, and lungs meant everything. She was small, smaller than Elena had prepared herself for, which was saying something because she had been preparing. She had read the statistics on premature birth at 34 weeks. She had asked Dr. Finch every question she could think of, and several she'd thought of in the middle of the night. She had prepared. And then Nora was in her arms, tiny and furious and real, in the way that nothing in Elena's life had prepared her for. Not the pregnancy, not the ultrasounds, not the kicks she'd felt for the last 11 weeks. This was different. This was a person. She looked at her daughter's face. She did not have words for it. She had never been without words before, which told her something about the category this fell into. She looked up. Dominic was standing near the window, and he was looking at Nora with his face entirely undone. No control, no management, no performance of any kind. He looked like a man who had just encountered something that had made everything he thought he understood about himself obsolete. He looked the way Elena had felt in the pharmacy parking lot 18 weeks ago, when the test came back positive and her hands were shaking and she couldn't stop crying. She held out her arm. He came to the side of the bed. He sat on the edge. She shifted Nora slightly, and he looked at her. This was his daughter, 6 weeks early, and screaming her way into the world. And Elena watched him look and understood that whatever came next, however long and uneven the road was going to be, this moment had happened, was real, could not be taken back. He touched Nora's hand with one finger. Nora's hand, 5 fingers, impossibly small, closed around his finger without intention, pure reflex, the grip of a new life doing what new life does. Dominic made a sound, not words, just a sound, quiet, involuntary, the sound of a man cracking open at something that couldn't be resisted. Elena looked away. She looked at the window, at the storm outside beginning to lighten with the first gray suggestion of dawn, and she breathed, and her heart, her watchful, careful, working heart, held steady. Elena spent 5 days in the hospital. Nora spent 11 days in the NICU. Dominic came every day. He did not stay unless she asked, did not make himself comfortable in the space without permission, did not assume. He brought coffee in the mornings, the right kind from the right place, which he had identified through 2 failed attempts and 1 text to Pete. He sat in the chair when there was a chair and stood when there wasn't, and he learned the nurses' names and the NICU routines and the specific language of monitors and oxygen levels and feeding schedules that Elena had already mastered. On the 4th day, he asked if he could hold Nora. Elena watched the nurse help him position his arms. This large man, who had spent 20 years managing an empire, accepting instruction from a woman half his size on how to cradle his daughter. He followed the instruction precisely. He held Nora against his chest and looked down at her, and he did not talk, did not fill the moment with words. He just held her. Elena took a photo. Not for anything, just because she wanted to have it. Nora came home to the Sea Anchor on a Thursday in late November, which was technically not a home, and Della charged by the week, and the crib was second-hand, but Della had moved the furniture around and put up curtains and brought over a casserole and said, with her reading glasses on her forehead and the particular gruffness of someone who had been quietly rooting for them, "It'll do until you figure out the rest." The rest took time. That was the honest version. Elena did not move in with Dominic on Margin Street for 4 months. She did not tell him she was rebuilding her trust in him for 3 more after that. She did not say, in those words clearly, out loud, that she was choosing to try again until Nora was 7 months old and sitting up on her own and reaching for things with both hands. And Elena was watching her and Dominic was sitting on the floor next to her, and all 3 of them were in the same room doing ordinary things. And the ordinary felt, specifically and precisely, like what she had always wanted. She said it then. Not dramatically. Not with a speech. She said, "I think we're doing okay." Dominic looked up from Nora, who had gotten hold of his watch and was examining it with complete concentration. "Yeah," he said. "I think so too." Nora dropped the watch, picked it up, dropped it again with evident satisfaction. They watched her. The Boston operation was formally dissolved over 18 months. The properties were sold. The accounts were restructured through legitimate channels. The officials who had enjoyed Dominic Voss's particular arrangements found themselves managing their exposure without his cooperation, which was a problem that belonged to them now. Dominic did not return to Boston except once, for a final meeting with the federal attorney that lasted 3 hours and ended with a handshake he hadn't expected. He drove home to Hartley Cove. Margin Street. The kitchen faucet he'd fixed himself. The coffee that was better at the Anchor. The harbor smell every morning. A town that didn't know who he had been and didn't particularly care who he was now, only whether he tipped adequately and showed up when he said he would. He showed up when he said he would. Consistently, without exception, which was the only promise he had made and the only one that mattered. Elena watched him keep it. Not all at once. Not in a moment of grace or revelation. Slowly, the way water works on stone, patient and cumulative and transformative precisely because it doesn't force anything, just continues, just stays. She watched him choose, every day, the smaller thing over the larger thing. The hour with Nora over the call he could have taken. The conversation she was ready to have over the one he wanted to have. The quiet of a Tuesday evening in a house that smelled like their daughter over everything he'd built and spent 20 years defending. She watched him become, in increments so small they were almost invisible, someone she could trust. It was not a straight line. There were days it went backward. There were conversations that ended badly, and silences that lasted too long, and moments where the old Dominic surfaced, controlled and managing and expecting to be accommodated. And she held the line, and he caught himself. And they found their way back. There were more good days than bad, then significantly more. Then the ratio shifted completely, and she stopped counting. The last thing, the thing that settled it fully, happened when Nora was 14 months old. She was walking by then, unsteadily, with the particular determination of a person who has decided to move through the world on her own terms and is not especially interested in what the laws of physics have to say about it. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn jaw and her own everything else, which was considerable. She was walking across the living room floor of the house they had found together on the Harbor Road. A real house now, not a motel room, not a rental, but a place with their names on a lease and Nora's handprints on the hall wall because Elena had done that on purpose, a record of the size she'd been. And she walked directly to Dominic, who was sitting on the floor, and she grabbed his face with both hands. He went completely still. Nora examined him with the serious attention she brought to everything. Then she made a sound, not a word yet, or not quite, that was clearly meant to communicate something specific. He looked up at Elena, who was leaning in the doorway. "What does that mean?" he said. "I don't know," Elena said. "She made it up. She makes up words for things she doesn't have words for yet." Nora made the sound again, more emphatically, still holding his face. He looked at his daughter. "Okay," he said to her, like a commitment, like an agreement. "Okay." She patted his cheek twice. Then she let go and walked away, unsteady and purposeful, toward whatever interested her next. Dominic sat on the floor and watched her go. Elena watched him watch her. And the house was quiet, and the harbor was outside, and the storm season was over, and the morning light was doing something clean and uncomplicated through the east window, and none of it was perfect. Not the history, not the road that had brought them here, not the scar tissue of everything they had lost, and the things they would probably never fully recover. But they were here, all three of them. In a house with handprints on the wall, and a faucet that no longer dripped, and a name that had been chosen in a dark room during the worst night of both their lives. And it was enough. It was, in the way of things that are earned rather than given, more than enough. It was exactly what they had chosen, and exactly what they had paid for, and for the first time in a very long time, that felt like the same thing.